said, I'm Emily, and I'm going to be talking about Disney princesses and how that relates to rape culture. So, we all know the Disney princesses. A lot of us love them. They're classic stories in American culture. If you grew up in America, you probably have seen at least one Disney princess movie. My personal favorite is Ariel. I dyed my hair red for 2 years to look like her. What are some of y'all's favorites?
Jasmine!
Okay, good choice. Okay.
Mulan!
Yep, she's awesome. Yeah, so we all have our favorites. We all have our favorite stories. We're going to be talking about some of those a little bit later on. But first, we're going to be talking about the Disney princesses, kind of an overview and how they work as an industry. Because at their core, that's the purpose that they serve. Disney created all these stories for all these different princesses, made movies, made merchandise. You can buy backpacks, lunch boxes, pencils, hats, t-shirts, you name it, you can buy it in a Disney product with your favorite princess on it. And the important thing about that is that it means that those stories and the way that those characters are being represented is not for a moral reason, it's not for an educational purpose, it's really to sell a product to you. And in this case, whatever princess product you might want, and to sell those stories to you as being a good example of moral behavior in the way that relationships can unfold and how people interact with each other. So when we're thinking about Disney as a corporation then, we can't think about these stories as being neutral. Because Disney's doing it to make money. They made $50 billion in 2017, which is insane. That's from the TV channel, it's from the remakes of a lot of the princess movies, you know, the live-action Beauty and the Beast with Emma Watson. They're constantly making money off this stuff. And that's important to think about when we think about who their target audience is, in this case, children, young women in particular, because kids are watching 30 hours of TV and movies a week. That's a lot, and this is a statistic isn't super new, and so you can only imagine how that's grown with children being able to have access to things like iPads and iPods. We all see it in restaurants where parents are giving their kids an iPad so they're not being disruptive to other guests in the restaurant, or you're on a train, you're on a bus, you're on an airplane, and they have an iPad to watch TVs and movies, which is not the worst thing in the world. It means we're not being disrupted by screaming children, but it also means that we're watching more of these stories and being exposed to more of them. And so we have to think about what those messages are. And it's not necessarily a bad thing that we're being exposed to all those messages. We just have to be conscious of them because the things that we're being exposed to, I'm going to put this down because it doesn't seem to work. Things we're being exposed to can have a different impact on us in the way that we view things in society. There's a psychological concept that's called categorization, which is a super important way that we're able to understand the world around us. It basically means that we can have one experience, interact with one kind of person, hear one voice in particular, see one kind of food or thing or idea, and then know how to interact with the rest of them if they're similar enough. So, for example, we all know the difference between apples and oranges. Oranges are orange, they're round, apples aren't quite round, one is more bitter than the other. You might cook with them in different ways or eat them in different contexts. You can squeeze the juice out of an orange, probably not an apple with your bare hands. But it's not crucial that we know the difference between these two things. If you confuse them, nothing bad will happen, no one will get hurt, it will just maybe be a little bit weird. A different example where categorization can become more important and more dangerous is looking at these two different plants. We've evolved to know which plants are dangerous to us and which ones aren't. So just looking at these two, you might not be able to tell what the differences are, but the one on the left is actually poison, and the one on the right is basil. One of them you're totally fine eating, you're totally fine touching, growing even in your own garden, but poison ivy, you certainly don't want to eat that, let alone touch it. And we learned very early on from experience or from being told at a nature camp or by our parents or in school that you don't want to touch, eat, whatever, poison ivy, but basil is awesome. And so being able to tell the difference in that context has a little bit of a higher stake, which kind of takes us into talking about the princesses' stories. Because at the crux of it, it's showing different kinds of behavior and romantic interactions and how they can be good and bad. But if we're watching those movies and seeing certain interactions being portrayed in a positive light, it's hard for us to know later on when those boundaries might have been pushed too far. start Beauty and the Beast. See Belle here and Gaston. It's a classic scene. He's just saying an entire song about how he wants to marry her because he's the manliest man and he won't take no for an answer no matter what. Which already sounds kind of messed up, right? And then we've got this end scene here with him hitting her against a door and then her being the kind of sassy girl that she is. She opens and lets him fall out on his face. But he continues this pattern throughout the movie of trying to trap her in spaces, force her into a relationship with him, and basically force her to marry him, which is a perfect depiction of the way we describe rape culture in a lot of ways. Particularly, he's willing to go to such extreme measures with her. He literally, practically, kidnaps her father so he can trap her into a marriage because she won't have somewhere to live. Like, just stop and think about that for a second, about how ridiculous that is. But it's portrayed here as being a caricature of masculinity, something that's funny, something we should laugh at, and maybe he ends up being like the bad guy at the end of the movie. But he's not condemned for any of this. He's condemned because he tries to kill the Beast, the other male character fighting for Belle, who also, while we're talking about him, is problematic because he does a very similar thing. Remember, he traps Belle in the palace with the intention of keeping her there long enough for her to fall in love with him. And in this case, it works. Disney is showing that that is a good strategy to get a woman to fall in love with you. If you keep them trapped for long enough and force them to spend time with you, eventually they'll have feelings for you. Which is super problematic because it's showing that this is a strategy that first of all works, second of all, you should be okay with. If someone's trapping you somewhere, it's romantic. Not dangerous, it's romantic. We kind of see the opposite of this with Aladdin. A lot of similar behaviors in terms of Jafar and his relationship with Jasmine, where he tries to be coercive with her. He's always talking to her dad about how he, kind of creepily is into her and stuff throughout the beginning of the movie. And then at the end, when he gets the power of the genie, and he has his 3 wishes, one of them is to become a sorcerer, so he can do stuff like that, which is, put her in like a binding spell, force her to bow to him, force her to say that she loves him, force her to feed him apples while she's chained up and wear sexy outfits for him because he thinks it would be fun and interesting. And then his final wish from the genie is to make her fall in love with him, which again gets at that same dynamic of trying to trap someone, to force them to do something against their will. In this case, again, a romantic relationship, but it has that same basis of power dynamics, where he doesn't want to respect her decisions and her free choice, and instead decides that he's going to use the power of magic to make her do something. This is, I would say, different than Beauty and the Beast in a lot of ways, because this is being portrayed in a negative light. He is unquestionably the villain in this story, and he is portrayed in a negative light. These activities are portrayed in a negative light, so you definitely see both sides here, where they're still portraying these unhealthy relationships, but here they do a little bit better job of showing that they're unhealthy and not pretending like they're okay. The last sort of classic Disney trope that we're going to talk about is being woken up from a drugged state, a sleeping state, by your true love's kiss. It's their favorite storyline. They love it. And you can see here, it's in both Sleeping Beauty and Snow White. And so when we think about consent and we think about romantic interactions and physical relationships, a lot of times what we talk about in definitions of consent is that it has to be a freely given yes, and that the person is not in an incapacitated state, which includes sleep and being drugged. Now, of course, for these storylines, these princesses will never wake up if they don't give their true love's kiss, which is problematic in and of itself, that sort of reliance is there in the first place. But it's problematic that then this is being depicted as something that's normal or okay, that these kisses are happening. And if you look at the history of the way these storylines developed, it actually kind of gets even more disturbing, particularly for Sleeping Beauty, because in the original storyline, in the original fairy tale, it's not her true love's kiss that wakes her up, it's rape. Literally, like, being penetrated is the only thing that will wake her up. It's not about true love, it's not about a romantic kiss, some beautiful scene. It's literally she has to be penetrated, and that's the only way she can be woken up, which is literally condoning rape. And so when you look at it through that light of how the story developed, it really changes your perspective about what they're trying to show you with this watered down PG scene that they've created to be in popular films.
Me Too and all these cultural norms and trying to change our society, we often start at a much higher level. We talk about what people are doing now, what behaviors adults are partaking in, and what kinds of things we need to change there in terms of business practices. But we don't talk about where we learned that those things are okay. We don't talk about why boys will be boys is a phrase that we all know and that we've probably all used or heard be used and didn't necessarily have a problem with it. And that's not saying anything bad about us. It's saying something about the way that we're raised, the media that we're raised on, the messages that we're getting, and the things that we're learning. When we're children, we're sponges for new information. And when we're seeing scenes like this, like Belle being pinned against a door and then the beast trapping her to make her fall in love with him, we learn that those behaviors are normal and okay. And that's sort of base level knowledge is where we have to start if we want to change the future.